The session of the German Synod held this week has shown the spirit of its organizers. I'm not talking about the objectives. They have been very clear from the beginning. I'm referring to the character, to the way of being, to that of what they brag about and they lack, and that is called tolerance. They have got to a point that I think it can be said without exaggerating that the Nazis have returned, if they were ever gone. The Synod, this session of the Synod that has lasted for 4 days, started with a surprise. A document was being voted in the first session calling for a radical modification of the Church's sexual morality. Practically all of the lay people and bishops were in agreement. But a small minority, a significant one, a third of the bishops against all forecasts, voted against. And that, according with the regulations that the Synod imposed to itself, meant that the document would not pass. The outrage was huge. The anger was immense. The president of the German bishops, Bishop Batzing, even said he didn't see that coming. It's his phrase. He didn't see it coming, that is to say that he had not anticipated that there would be a group of 21 bishops who were those who rejected the document, that such bishops existed and that they were willing to vote against. He didn't see it coming. Why? Because the majority of the bishops are so scared that they prefer to remain silent during the debates. He showed his anger, his disappointment, and in that same line spoke his alter ego, Cardinal Marx. Well, then the lay people threatened even with immediately leaving the synodal assembly and with, of course, abandoning the church and generating a massive church disenfranchising campaign, the first session. In the second session, and in order not to repeat the issue and also voting on the female priesthood, the document expressed that there was the need to go for the female priesthood and not for deaconate, which is a trompe-l'oeil. Everyone knows it's nothing more than an excuse to achieve the goal, priesthood and then women's episcopate. Well, as it was anticipated that something similar could happen, Batzing gathered all the bishops behind closed doors and proposed them a transaction. Instead of approving a document that said that a female priesthood should be established, the document said that they were going to ask Rome to study the possibility of approving the female priesthood. That's not much, because Rome has been requested that dozens of times and since a long time. That document was a watered down one, was approved without any problems. It didn't have an actual practical signification. And there is where the inflection point occurred and where they showed their dictatorial spirit. And I would even say Nazi, because that's what they did. Not just them, communists also, both were very similar, but we're talking about Germany. Immediately after they reached an agreement watering down the document calling for female priesthood, the lay people pressured, and then, on the fly, they made changes to the assembly's voting rules and decided that from that moment on, voting would stop being secret and had to be a show of hands. That is to say, it had to be made publicly. That small, important, and sufficient group of conservative bishops immediately dissolved. Of the 21 for the following 2 documents, remained 8 who publicly voted against and 8 abstained. The other 5 voted in favor. That document, the third, was a document in which it was stated that there would not be any type of reprisal toward church employees, religion teachers, and maybe priests living in a way contrary to what establishes the Catholic morality, that is to say, homosexual relationships with their couples or cohabitation relationships. It was approved by a broad majority, and the other was a document in which the creation of a permanent synodal council was approved by a vast majority of liberal subjects, lays, and bishops, almost everybody, that will coordinate the application of the synod both in the diocese, as it will have a coercive nature over the diocesan bishops and certainly over the parishes. From now on, that synodal council will be the one governing the German church, I insist, both over the diocese and the parishes. It's clear what those who changed the secret vote for the public vote pretended. It is evident that what some wanted and also what the others saw coming. Truth be told, in my opinion, right, the 21 should have been ready for martyrdom, but no, unfortunately, they were not. But we must realize what they were facing in the minds of everyone was the recent past of many places of the church. For example, churches burned down in Chile with absolute impunity, and nothing happens in that country. The attacks against the church in Argentina, where when the day of the female worker comes, or any other allegedly feminist demonstration, it appears published in all the newspapers, in all mass media, nothing happens. Allegedly, those are groups enraged by the high cost of living or LGBT groups. But in reality, they are professionals, paramilitary paid, professionals in all that. And nothing happens. This, which we have seen and continue seeing in countries such as Chile and Argentina, has been happening in a lower level and for a long time also in Germany. The public condemnations, the harassment against priests, bishops, even going to the churches when Mass is being celebrated unless they are liberal priests or bishops. In Belgium, the previous conservative archbishop, not the current, but the previous conservative, had to endure having a cake smashed in his face during a conference. And of course, on everyone's minds, on that of all who promoted this, and in the minds of all who have been scared, on everyone's mind were things much more serious than a pie in the face. I'm talking about the absurd accusations against Cardinal Pell, which held him in jail for more than a year, or the recent even more ridiculous and absurd accusations against Cardinal Ouellet by a woman saying that in public the Cardinal placed his hand in her lower back without specifying the height of the lumbar vertebra in public in front of everyone. And now, 40 years later, the woman remembers it and she says she's very upset. Everyone knows in the church at this time what they face if they dare to defend Catholic doctrine in Germany in the first place, or in a special way at least. Nazism, if it ever was gone from these groups, Nazism has returned. Anyone daring to go against what this violent majority is determined to do, and thus will be persecuted one way or another, even to the point of slander or defamation, doing everything possible to destroy that person, and if not, just as the Cardinal of Cologne. The matter is very clear. They will not back down. They will continue their path. They will apply it. And now we must ask, first, what will the lay people do? What will the German Catholic lay people do if they encounter a religion professor, a catechist that is teaching a moral doctrine contrary to that of the church? If they are teaching it to their children, preparing for their first communion or confirmation, what will the lay people do? What will the lay people do if they go to Mass and in the homily the priest teaches and explains doctrines contrary to those of the church? Or even if the priest has a partner and comes up with a partner to greet everyone at the end of the Mass, what will the lay people do? Will they leave the church? Will they stop contributing the religious tax? And if so, they will not be able to request a funeral. They will not be able to take their children to catechesis, request the first communion or the confirmation. But then again, what catechesis will they be taught? What deformation, I'm not saying formation, but deformation will be taught if it's not being taught already? What will the lay people do? And what will the priest do if the bishop forces them to give the communion to someone who, in conscience, they believe cannot receive it? Or if, for instance, in their parish is created a layman's commission that demands to review their homily and censors those things the priest would want to say, but goes against all this theology of adaptation to the worst of the world. And what will the Vatican do? What will the Holy See do when all this starts to be implemented? This is not just a matter of let's see what happens. No, it's being approved, and in addition, they have decided to execute it. They have created an organization, a permanent synodal council to execute it. There are bishops who will implement in their diocese even those matters that were not approved, such as the ones occurred on the first day with all that issue of the church's sexual morality, or that on the second day about the female priesthood. What will the Vatican do when all this happens? The president of the Young German Catholics has just made some remarks saying he's within this vast majority group of the Synod, that they don't want a national German church. But there will be no choice if the rest of it, the universal church, does not advance with them, not just allow them to do what they want, but if they do not walk along with them, if they do not imitate and follow their example. This is the situation, and it's placed, I repeat, in front of everyone's eyes with absolute clarity. Either a schism is faced in Germany, perhaps also in Belgium and possibly Switzerland. I don't think much more, but certainly in these places a schism is faced with all the consequences, or on the contrary, this virus of heresy is allowed to spread throughout the church, because to the extent that they are allowed to do what they want with impunity, as in some things they have been doing, to that extent many in many countries will say what that old saying says: silence implies consent, and doing nothing will be interpreted by many as a kind of approval. Therefore, there will also be those who, wherever, sometimes at bishops' conference, sometimes at diocese, or sometimes at parishes, will imitate them. The spirit of these dictators has appeared. There is no tolerance. Anyone not voting as they wish publicly better be prepared for persecution. Let's pray the Lord for the strength of the martyrs to love and defend him the way he deserves to be loved and defended. Until next week, God willing.